There was a time growing up in Britain when certain words didn't need explaining, when a single sentence, spoken in a familiar tone, could instantly change the mood of a room, bring a conversation to an abrupt halt, or send you quietly back to your place without another word being needed. These weren't just phrases, and they weren't said lightly, because each one carried with it a meaning that went far beyond the words themselves, shaped by tone, timing, and the unmistakable authority of the person saying them. You heard them at the dinner table, in the hallway, from the kitchen, or just as you were about to step outside, and over time, they became part of the rhythm of everyday life, repeated so often that they felt almost universal, as though every child across the country was hearing the same things in the same moments. Looking back now, it is not just what was said that stays with you, but how it felt to hear it. Number 1. Because I said so. There were moments when you asked a question, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of frustration, hoping for a reason that might make sense of whatever rule had just been placed in front of you, and for a brief second, it felt as though a conversation might follow. But instead, the response came quickly, firmly, and without hesitation, delivered in a tone that left no room for negotiation, no space for further discussion, and no possibility of appeal. Because I said so. It was not an explanation, and it was never meant to be, because the authority behind it was considered reason enough. And once those words were spoken, you understood immediately that the conversation was over. Number 2. Don't answer back. Even the smallest attempt to defend yourself, to explain your side of the story, or to correct what you believed was unfair, could quickly be interpreted in a way you had not intended. You might have thought you were simply speaking, offering a reason, or trying to be heard, but the moment your tone shifted, or your words lingered just a little too long, the response would come, sharp and unmistakable. Don't answer back. And just like that, what had felt like a conversation became something else entirely, a reminder that speaking was not the same as being allowed to respond. Number 3. Wait till your father gets home. There were few phrases that carried as much quiet weight as this one, often spoken calmly, almost casually, and yet filled with a sense of anticipation that lingered long after the words themselves had faded. It was not about what would happen immediately, but about what was coming later, about a moment that had not yet arrived but already felt unavoidable. Wait till your father gets home. And from that point on, time seemed to move differently, every passing minute building towards something you could not quite predict, but instinctively understood would not be pleasant. Number 4. Money doesn't grow on trees. Requests, no matter how small they seemed at the time, were often met with a reminder that the world did not simply provide things because you wanted them. You might have asked for something simple, a toy, a treat, or something you had seen elsewhere, and for a moment, it felt reasonable, even harmless. But the response grounded you quickly, bringing you back to a reality that felt far more serious than your request had intended. Money doesn't grow on trees. It was not just a refusal, but a lesson, repeated often enough that it became part of how you understood value itself. Number 5. If your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? There were times when your decisions were questioned not just for what they were, but for why you had made them, particularly when the answer involved someone else. You might have said that everyone else was doing it, that it was normal, that you did not want to be left out, and for a brief moment, that reasoning felt convincing. But it was always met with the same response, delivered with a mixture of disbelief and quiet challenge. If your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? And suddenly, what had felt like a shared experience became something you were expected to justify on your own. Number 6. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Emotion, especially when it appeared suddenly or loudly, was not always met with comfort, and in many homes, it was something to be controlled rather than explored. Tears, frustration, or upset could quickly draw attention, and that attention did not always bring reassurance. Instead, it might be met with a warning, one that seemed to suggest that the feeling itself was less important than how it was being expressed. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. It was a phrase that carried both instruction and threat, delivered in a way that made you question whether showing emotion was worth it at all. Number 7. Close that door, you're not heating the whole street. Even the smallest actions, things that felt insignificant at the time, could quickly become moments of correction, particularly when they touched on something practical. You might have left a door slightly open without thinking, moving from one room to another, unaware of the draft or the change in temperature behind you. But it never went unnoticed for long. Close that door, you're not heating the whole street. And suddenly, something as simple as a door became a lesson in responsibility. Number 8. Were you born in a barn? Manners were not always taught through explanation and often came instead through quick, familiar remarks that carried their meaning instantly. If you left a door open, forgot something basic, or behaved in a way that felt careless, the response would arrive almost automatically. Were you born in a barn? It was not a genuine question, of course, but one that reminded you, in a slightly humorous but unmistakably pointed way, that certain standards were expected, whether they had been explained or not. Number 9. Children should be seen and not heard. There was an understanding, sometimes spoken, sometimes simply felt, that children occupied a particular place in the world, and that place did not always include being part of every conversation. In certain situations, particularly when adults were talking, there was an expectation that you would be present, but quiet, aware, but not involved. Children should be seen and not heard. It was a phrase that defined boundaries, not through rules written down, but through repetition and tone. Number 10. Eat your dinner, there are children starving. Meal times were not just about eating, but about finishing what was in front of you, regardless of preference, appetite, or mood. You might have hesitated, pushed something slightly to the side, or simply slowed down. And that hesitation would often be met with a reminder that reached far beyond the table itself. Eat your dinner, there are children starving. It was a phrase that connected your small moment to something much larger, whether you fully understood it or not. Number 11. Put a jumper on. Discomfort, particularly something as simple as feeling cold, was rarely treated as something that required much discussion. You might have mentioned it in passing, expecting perhaps a solution or a change, but the response was immediate and practical. Put a jumper on. It was a phrase that appeared in all kinds of situations, simple, direct, and entirely sufficient in the eyes of the person saying it. Number 12. I'm not made of money. Requests had a way of being measured not just by what they were, but by what they represented, and often the answer came in the form of a reminder rather than a refusal. I'm not made of money. It was said in different tones, sometimes lightly, sometimes with more weight, but always with the same underlying message that what you were asking for had a cost that mattered. Number 13. Don't sit too close to the television. In living rooms filled with the soft glow of a single screen, where families gathered around shared programs, there were small rules that shaped how those moments unfolded. You might have moved a little closer, drawn in by what you were watching, unaware of the distance you had closed. But it was always noticed. Don't sit too close to the television. A simple instruction, repeated often enough that it became part of the ritual itself. Number 14. You'll understand when you're older. There were questions that did not receive answers, not because they could not be explained, but because it was felt that the explanation would not make sense, at least not yet. You might have asked why something worked the way it did, or why a decision had been made, expecting clarity, but instead, you were given something else. You'll understand when you're older. A phrase that closed the conversation gently but firmly, leaving the meaning somewhere in the future. Number 15. You'll never amount to anything if you carry on like that. And then there were the phrases that stayed with you, not just in the moment, but long after. Words that seemed to reach forward into your future, shaping how you saw yourself in ways you did not fully realize at the time. You'll never amount to anything if you carry on like that. It was not always meant as harshly as it sounded, sometimes said in frustration, sometimes in an attempt to correct, but the weight of it lingered nonetheless. Because unlike the others, this one did not just describe what you were doing, it suggested what you might become. And yet, for all of these phrases, for all the repetition, the familiarity, and the quiet authority behind them, there is something strangely comforting in remembering them now. Because they were not just words, they were part of a shared experience, something that connected households, classrooms, and generations, repeated in slightly different tones, in slightly different moments, but always understood in exactly the same way. And perhaps that is why they stayed with us. Not because of what they meant, but because we all heard them.